A small piece of black card, no bigger than your palm. No writing on it, no signature, no explanation. Just black. That's all it took. A pirate captain would walk into his cabin, find it sitting on his table, and know exactly what it meant. His crew had just voted him out. His authority was gone. And if he didn't step down quietly, things were about to get very ugly very fast. The black spot. One of the most chilling signals in the entire history of the sea. And here's the part that makes historians argue to this day. Nobody can agree on whether it was real. Some say it was a genuine pirate practice, used across the Caribbean during the Golden Age. Others say Robert Louis Stevenson invented it completely for Treasure Island in 1883, and the world simply decided it was true. But dig deeper into the actual records, and the answer turns out to be far more complicated than either side admits. Because the black spot sits right on the border between documented history and the stories sailors told each other to stay sane on long ocean crossings. And that border is where the most interesting things always live. Start with what we know for certain. Pirate crews during the Golden Age, roughly 1713 to 1726, operated under a system of written articles. Every man who joined a crew signed a document before the first voyage. That document spelled out exactly how plunder would be divided, what punishments applied to what offenses, and, critically, how a captain could be removed from command. This last point is the one most people never hear about. Pirates had one of the most democratic systems of governance on the planet in the early 1700s. The captain held near absolute authority during battle. But outside of combat, the crew could vote him out. The quartermaster, elected separately by the crew, acted as a check on the captain's power at all times. If a majority decided the captain was too reckless, too greedy, or simply too dangerous to follow, they had the right to remove him. And they exercised that right regularly. Bartholomew Roberts, the most successful pirate of the entire Golden Age, with over 400 captured vessels to his name, served under a captain named Howell Davis before Davis was killed in an ambush. The crew voted immediately on a replacement. Roberts, who had only recently joined as a reluctant prisoner, won the vote. A man who hadn't chosen piracy at all suddenly found himself commanding one of the most feared crews in the Atlantic. That kind of rotation of power, decided by majority vote, was exactly the environment where something like a formal removal signal could develop. A physical object. A piece of evidence. Proof that the vote had happened and the result was final. Now here's where things get genuinely murky. The only surviving written account of the black spot from the actual Golden Age period comes from a single source. A general history of the pirates published in 1724 under the name Captain Charles Johnson. Nobody knows for certain who Captain Charles Johnson actually was. The book appeared just 2 years after the Golden Age effectively ended with the death of Bartholomew Roberts in 1722. It contains detailed accounts of pirate captains, their ships, their crew structures, and their customs. It reads like first-hand reporting, and for 300 years it has been treated as the primary historical source on Golden Age piracy. But there's a problem. Johnson never explicitly describes a physical black spot being handed to a captain. What the book does describe in detail are the voting mechanisms, the articles of agreement, and the formal procedures for removing a captain from command. The physical black card itself, the object, the ritual of passing it across a table in a dark cabin, that specific image comes almost entirely from Stevenson's novel, written 159 years later. So what Stevenson did was take a real practice, the formal crew vote to remove a captain, and turn it into a physical prop. He gave the process a shape, a color, a weight. He made it something you could hold in your hand and feel the threat of. And the world found that image so perfectly suited to what pirates were that it absorbed it completely into real history. But here's the thing Stevenson got right, even if he invented the object itself. The color black was already loaded with meaning in pirate culture before he wrote a single word. The black flag, which pirates called the Jolie Rouge in its red version, and simply the black flag in its dark version, carried a specific message that every sailor in the Caribbean understood. Red meant no mercy, fight us and everyone dies. Black meant surrender peacefully and you will probably survive. Black was the color of the offer, of the negotiation, of the last chance before things turned permanent. So when Stevenson chose black for his removal signal, he was pulling from something real without necessarily knowing the full history of why that color meant what it meant to men who lived and died on the water. And there's one more documented piece of the real story that gets almost no attention: the practice of shunning. In several recorded pirate articles of agreement, a captain found guilty of serious misconduct by crew vote was not simply removed. He was formally cut off from the community of the ship. Men stopped speaking to him directly. His orders were no longer acknowledged. He ate alone. He stood watches alone. He existed on the ship as a ghost until the next port where he could be put ashore. This social death, complete and deliberate, enforced by every single member of the crew simultaneously, was in many ways more powerful than any physical signal. You didn't need a black card to destroy a man's authority. You needed every person around him to act as though that authority had simply ceased to exist. The black card just made it official in 30 seconds instead of 3 days. So where does that leave us? The black spot as a physical object, a piece of card pressed into a captain's palm with the weight of a death sentence, almost certainly came from Robert Louis Stevenson's imagination. He built it from real materials, real pirate democracy, real voting procedures, real meaning attached to the color black. But the specific ritual, the card, the moment, the theater of it, that was his invention. And it was such a perfect invention that it slid into history so smoothly that even serious researchers spent decades assuming it must have come from somewhere real. Which raises a question worth sitting with. How many other things we treat as historical fact about the golden age of piracy are actually that same process in reverse? A real practice, refined and dramatized by a novelist or a playwright, polished until it was more vivid than the truth, and then handed back to history as if it had always been there. The Jolly Roger, the buried treasure, the walking of the plank. Most of these have either no documentary evidence at all, or evidence so thin and contradictory that the legend has completely swallowed the fact. The black spot is the honest version of that process. We know where it came from. We know what it was built on. And knowing that doesn't make it less interesting. It makes it more interesting. Because the pirates of the Golden Age were already remarkable enough without the mythology. They built functioning democracies on the water decades before nations did it on land. They created legal frameworks for violence and profit that were more internally consistent than most colonial governments of the era. They were brutal and calculating, and occasionally generous in ways that made no sense by the standards of the world they were robbing. The black spot is a perfect symbol for all of that, not because it was real, but because it should have been.